particularly our guest speakers today, who I'll introduce in just a second. We just want to remind all of you that dues are due. And it is a very reasonable amount of money.
All right.
$10 a person? Come on! That's the cheapest club in town. So, but, you know, the justice-loving folks of Voices for Justice in Palestine would so appreciate you renewing your dues or joining the club. And the person to do it is at the table in the back. So please do that. Thank you. In terms of timing, the timing of our speakers today could not be more appropriate. I want to call your attention to a headline that's on The Guardian today. The Guardian says, keeping nice and quiet in the back of the room there, thank you. Marvin, that's you. The Guardian says, a step in the wrong direction. Israel's West Bank plans prompt global backlash. And so we are going to be hearing about some of the possible results of that plan. And of course, Netanyahu himself is coming to the White House tomorrow, I believe. So don't we all wish we were there? All right, turning to our guest speakers now. Professor Jenna Hens-Piazza is going to speak to us today about her insights from a 2-week women's program that she led to Israel-Palestine in January of 2026. Yes, she's just back. We also welcome Monique Baylock, who was part of the team of the women who went. Dr. Hens-Piazza is the Joseph S. Alemany Professor of Biblical Studies at the Jesuit School of Theology at Santa Clara University. In 2024, she was a visiting professor at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. She is the past president of the Catholic Biblical Association of America and recipient of the Catholic Press Award for research on violence in the Bible. So we are very honored to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Jenna Hens-Piazza and Monique.
Well, thank you very much for being here. The number of people here is just thrilling. I want to introduce my colleague here, Monique. I only came to know Monique recently, and as soon as we got to know each other, I knew that she was someone I wanted to invite to this plan I had to take a small group of women to Israel-Palestine, especially to Palestine, to meet with women's groups. So I want to introduce Monique, but I asked her to say some things about herself. I think she will speak more clearly than I will.
Hi, everyone. So as you heard, my name is Monique Baylock. I am recently retired after being unexpectedly laid off in 2024, which ended up being serendipitous. Because
a little closer to the mic.
Okay, so
Yes.
to recap, I'm retired recently, and it was unexpected, so I'm still adjusting to this term, but it's an intentional decision that I don't want to go back into what I was doing before. And this opened me up to really explore a lot of my passions that dated way before I started working in the corporate world. So Gina said, well, say something about you, about how you ended up here. So I guess what I would say is I'm the daughter of French immigrants who lived their formative years in occupied France. And so I grew up with an awareness that wasn't really clear as I was a child, but it was definitely an awareness of the human impact of conflict and the moral decisions that ordinary people have to do in these types of situations. So with that said, I've lived abroad earlier in my 20s, and obviously I've worked in corporate America. All of this has reinforced to me how the human condition and how we treat one another transcends borders and appears in both global conflicts and everyday life. So because of a lifelong interest in the intersection of theology, history, and gender, especially the role of women as peacemakers across biblical texts and historical movements, my curiosity comes from also undergraduate studies in political science with an emphasis on international relations. And it deepened throughout the years with just personal scripture study into the sacred scriptures of all the faiths, not just, I am Catholic, so, but with all the faiths. So, said that, but with that much said, I was drawn to join this group of women. We have another one of our sisters here. There were 8 of us who went, one of your residents, Nancy Midland.
Right there.
And what drew me when Jenna first told me about this program was the idea that we were going to go there and just listen. I think so much of the conflict in the world today is people don't listen to each other. So go and listen to stories. It was women-centric because so often women's stories never get told. And that's what I did. And I came back, it was a life-changing experience. So when we're here to tell you a little bit about it.
Maybe you stand up this way.
Okay.
She can stand. So just a little bit about my own experience in Palestine. During my graduate studies in the early 90s, I was at Union Theological Seminary in New York, and I wasn't studying any archaeology, and I felt like I needed that, so I went for a 4-month study. It was my first time in Israel, Palestine. I studied at Hebrew University up on Mount Scopus. There was no dividing wall at that time. I used to go down into Bethany for coffee and walked back down over the Mount of Olives, back down to where I was staying at the Swedish Institute. Some years later, I ended up going back because I had made a lot of friends, got to know the area, lived there. And then when I started teaching at the Jesuit school after probably about 10 years, I decided to build a course called Children of Sarah, Hagar, and Mary. And I taught it every 2 years for the last 14 years. And what it involves in spending a semester studying the literature of the Quran, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and studying it from women's perspective in conjunction with women's social standing in their lives. And then I would take this group of graduate students, usually 12 of them. We would go to women's sites. The students would prepare their preparations about the women's sites. We would have lectures that I would prepare, and it was really a great immersion during the month of January. Also in 2016, I was elected as one of the 10 scholars from around the country to participate in the Palestinian American Research Program, which involved us. All of us were from different disciplines. I represented theology and scripture. We spent 3 months visiting the 5 Palestinian universities and working with scholars, trying to come up with projects we could do together. And then we spent a lot of time in communities, and at the end each of us was given a task of a community to study. I was given the women of Jericho to study, which I was so grateful for, and that was one of the places, of course, we had spent some time in this time when we went back. And so I feel very fond of the land and the people, and I was desperate to go back and see people. And so I roped about 7 women together with me, and we decided, to tell the truth how this came about, the Latin patriarch, Cardinal Pizzabello, who I know, had gone to the Sisters of Zion, who run a program of pilgrimages, and says, you know, the tourism has stopped. Can you please get Hens Piazza over here to give some lectures, and we'll get some people to run the pilgrimages. I didn't want to do that. It sounded so at odds with what was going on there. And I said no. And of course, then my good Catholic guild girl self thought, well, you got to do something, Jenna. And so I did think about the fact that I remember one time when I was in Ida refugee camp, sitting and listening to a woman for about an hour who couldn't stop telling me her story in both English and Arabic, and I got enough of the story to know how desperate it was. It was 40 years of tyranny and 40 years of disappointment and 40 years of raising children where she never thought she'd raise children. And at the end of it, I was so tired of listening to her, to tell you the truth, but I was also feeling so desperate and powerless. And that's what I said. I said to her, I feel so powerless, I don't even know what to say. And she grabbed my hand and she said, you did do something. You listened to my story. And that kind of gave me this idea that maybe we could just go with no illusions that we were going to do anything spectacular for women, but we could go and be in solidarity with them, tell them that we want to hear what they're going through. We want to be able to be their ambassadors when we come back and tell their story, tell what's going on. And that's exactly what every single group asked us to do. They said, please let people know what's going on here. They're very aware of all the fixation on Gaza right now, which is warranted. But they're also very aware that no one seems to know, except in these trickled stories on the sides of the margins of newspapers, at best, of what is really going on right now in the West Bank. And as Victoria said, today and yesterday we hear that Israel has decided in its cabinet to assert sovereignty de facto over the West Bank, so there will never be a two-state solution talked about again, which is really, really devastating news. So today we're going to just give you a brief, I suppose, litany of some of the things we heard and some of the things we want to bring to you today. First of all, we just thought we'd give you a few pictures of some of our group and some of the people that we were visiting with. This is a Bedouin woman here, and the woman in the white sweater is she is the wife of one of the second-generation owners of this educational bookstore, which is in East Jerusalem. It used to be the Edward Said bookstore, and they were made to change the name. Then it was a Palestinian bookstore, and they were made to change the name, and now it's called the Educational Bookstore. And there's been some recent difficulties with the bookstore. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then just one other picture. This is some women that we spoke with up out on Harem Sharif, also known as Temple Mount, and had a lovely, long conversation with them. So I just thought I'd give you a little glance of some of our group and some of the people we met with. And so, the comprehensive summary, I suppose, of what we could talk about, and Monique's going to talk about this for a moment, is the experience of loss and the scope of loss. And so, Monique, go ahead.
So loss was, we're starting with it, we're ending it. It's pretty much what we came away with. The magnitude of loss that we heard over and over again. The first, a loss of trust, not just with each other, meaning Palestinians and Israelis, but we heard quite a bit of that from both sides. After October 7th for the Israelis, and then ever since with the horrific genocide in Gaza, the Palestinian. The trust that was once there, the hope for coexistence, really felt like it's lost. I mean, hoping that something can be done, but this loss of trust was huge from all directions. Loss of security, the fears we heard, paradoxically, they mirror each other. We heard fears from some Orthodox Jewish women we heard from on the safety of their sons in the military, their daughters in the military, and of course we heard lots and lots of fear from the Palestinians, from what their daily lived life. Sense of future is gone. We had an incredible bus driver, Mohammed, who is actually a longtime friend of Jinnah's. He's been working with her for years, and we learned so much from him. He I think at one point, Jenna, you asked him, do you have hope? And he said, not for me. I hope maybe for my children. But there is this loss of hope, this loss of any possibility of a changed future, of a future, yeah, I guess. And then, the loss of sense of future for their children. Then there's the economic loss, jobs that have disappeared. We talked about, Jenna just shared how she was originally asked to set something up just to get tourists in there so that the Palestinians can sell their wares, can make some money. Loss of jobs because of this, the checkpoints and the roadblocks. It really is an apartheid system where the Palestinians do not have power over their own life, over their own timetable. Then the loss of life, of course, we mentioned. Actually, we haven't mentioned loss of life, but we did hear quite a heartbreaking story from one Palestinian mother and her daughter. Their son and, we'll go into it a little later, but loss of life was a big one. Then the loss of your integrity and dignity and your respect, the way the Palestinians are treated now. We'll have some stories later on of the indignities, just being able to leave to go see your family. Mm-hmm. And then, all of this, the loss of opportunity to live a self-governing life.
And just, it was clearly a loss of hope. I think we heard only two groups that said something about hope, but that was difficult to hear. So we want to tell you what we heard, and this is kind of a litany of what we heard, and there was certainly more, and maybe Nancy, you'll have some suggestions too. When one leaves the West Bank to visit a relative or to take a vacation or to attend a serious health problem or to attend a funeral, say in another country, they have to apply for Israeli office for a leave, to leave Palestine, to leave the West Bank, or even to leave East Jerusalem. But they may not hear for months whether or not they're allowed to leave. So imagine hearing you are invited to a funeral, or you want to attend a parent's funeral or someone's funeral. You're not going to hear for months. And many times they're denied, even denied in terms of health issues. I know Hadassah now is very much working with, I believe it's St. Augustine Hospital up on Mount Scopus to try to help with cancer treatment because it's on the other side of the wall, because people often are not being led over to come for their cancer treatment. So the fact that you can't leave for health reasons or for funerals, etc., is just so unbelievable.
Then we heard that if one leaves their, I'm sorry, I'm not really good at this.
No, you're fine.
That if one leaves their home,
yes, let's read up to your comments.
okay, thank you.
There you go.
So we also heard, from Palestinians, that if they were to leave their home in East Jerusalem or the West Bank for more than 2 weeks unoccupied, the state of Israel has the right to confiscate it. We heard this from several areas, and it's clearly the fear of losing what is yours. And I'm thinking of one story of a young woman, an older woman now. She came when she was young. She was born and raised in East Jerusalem, and had just divorced a Spanish husband. She'd been living in Spain, and she came home with her 2 very young daughters under the age of 6. We'll go into that story a little later, but she talked about this need to, it's called the center of life. You have to prove, so if you're in the West Bank or East Jerusalem, Palestinians who were born and raised in what's now, or was at the separation when they partitioned Palestine, Israel, are Israeli citizens. But these people who are living in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank and Gaza, of course, have a certificate of residency. And there is just an incredible amount of bureaucracy to keep that going. And if you leave home, say to go abroad for a while, for a job or for education or whatever it is, the government has been known to come in and take your home. So you lose your home. And you're constantly having to prove your residency again by, just stacks and stacks of documents from utility bills. Anyway, it's just very, very cumbersome. Oops, sorry.
One thing we were struck with, I had asked Mohammed Qasimi, who I've known for 15 years, to be our driver, because I know he knows a lot. And we were struck by all the new high-end freeways that were being constructed. I haven't been there in 3 years, but I couldn't believe the change in the highways. Brand new highways, elevated highways over areas were being constructed to connect one settlement to another. And the plan was to begin to destroy or to shut down roads that connected one Palestinian village to another Palestinian village. Eventually, Ramallah and Bethlehem will be completely separated. Eventually, Bethlehem will be completely separated from Hebron, so you can't get from one to the other. So the goal, of course, is to basically separate these Palestinians from one another. And so they're doing that by way of roadways while they're constructing these really exquisite and high-end highways connecting settlements. And as I said, I hadn't been there in 3 years. I have never seen so many settlements before. And those that I saw before have expanded exponentially. So this is happening on massive scale right now.
And actually the day before we returned to the States, January 15th, a Palestinian village just outside of Jerusalem was burnt to the ground due to suspicion that someone was housing Hamas there. A finding that later was never confirmed. Now, we heard this from the local Palestinians, and it's just another example of their lived anxiety, their lived fear of never knowing what tomorrow will bring.
What the danger is.
Yeah.
Teachers in the West Bank, this was while we were there, were told they were no longer able to go through checkpoints because they would have to show the certificate that teachers in Israeli schools were required to carry to show their certification to educate. And these teachers coming from the West Bank teach in East Jerusalem in the parochial schools, and there's dozens of parochial schools in East Jerusalem. There's more parochial schools than there are public schools. And in those parochial schools, children get their lunches, they often get free after-school care, and sometimes that's extended because of checkpoints and people not being able to get through checkpoints to get their children, etc. But the parochial schools in East Jerusalem serve a tremendous population of people and do a tremendous social service. So to suddenly bar these women, mostly, from coming through the checkpoints because they don't have this certificate, which has never been required before, are basically closing almost all the parochial schools in East Jerusalem right now.
It's also an example of the loss of jobs for these teachers. Yes. So the traffic lights. We heard from multiple Palestinians that they're adjusted so that there is a 3 or 4 minute green light for traffic coming out of the settlements and over to Jerusalem to work. Whereas in the Palestinian neighborhoods, you encounter for green, when they cross a Palestinian neighborhood, they encounter for the green light, they only last long enough for about 3 to 4 cars to get through. So again, it's an inequality in, the Israeli government, of course, has justifications, but the bottom line is the lived experience for the Palestinian is a much more difficult life.
Yeah, the traffic jams are terrific for Palestinians. They have to wait and wait and wait. We actually experienced that. Our driver pointed it out to us. I mean, I would not have noticed it, but we were one of 3 cars that got through, and then the light changed right away because we were coming from East Jerusalem. So it's another way to begin to extinguish life, or make life so very difficult that starts to be extinguished. The destruction of large sections of East Jerusalem neighborhood is scheduled because Israel is going to build a high-tech center there that'll connect everyone, supposedly, but of course it'll probably only employ Israelis who are trained in high technology, but it will really destroy a large section of East Jerusalem where Palestinians live. So that's another unfortunate entity that Palestinians have no choice over.
And they're not just concerned about their homes, but it's an area which has all sorts of automotive repair shops and small businesses like that. So there's, again, loss of jobs. And they're calling it Silicon Wadi because supposedly it's going to be the Silicon Valley of Jerusalem.
Yes, they're being built with the help of American monies, especially people in the high-tech industry. You're right. Thank you for adding that. And then long-range plans, this one really kills me, to make the whole of the old city and the surrounding, Kidron Valley, Mount of Olives, into a biblical theme park with zip lines and a cable car, which will displace the people living in the Muslim, Christian, and Armenian quarters. Those are the oldest quarters. After the Six-Day War, the whole side of the Jewish quarter was rebuilt completely, so it's very new. But this will replace, really, these quarters. It'll displace people. And they already have probably the world's longest extension bridge just outside of Lion's Gate to the right through the Muslim cemetery extending down, and they advertise Shabbat for tourists, and you're to come down and listen to Shabbat songs on Friday after sundown. I want to say that we are staunchly against any kind of anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism really needs to be curtailed. It exists in our country and exists all over the world. But we are also staunchly against any kind of apartheid or genocide, and that is what is going on here. And it is so very difficult. It is so intensified, and the pace of it right now is so immense, is so fast. And so that is why we're here to say this.
So, here, this one, we learned that if a Palestinian-Israeli citizen marries a Palestinian from the West Bank or East Jerusalem, so again, an Israeli citizen marries someone with residency, but basically stateless, because and they want to travel outside of Israel, the non-Israeli citizen can be detained, they can even be taken into custody. Even if they're married to an Israeli citizen. And we learned this story at the Edward Said, the educational bookstore. The young woman we saw who's married to the second generation, she has Israeli citizenship. She's Palestinian. And she talked about but her husband, who is one of the owners of this bookstore, does not. So he is what do you call it? Yeah. And he is continuously pulled aside, and they have a 2.5-year-old child who, because she's Israeli, also has Israeli citizenship. And she shared how her husband is always telling her, just go ahead, I'll meet you later. And she refuses because we are a family, we're going to stay together. But because of her husband not having that citizenship, it will take them 10 to 12 hours to get through any type of checkpoint to get from one place to another.
If they decide to let him through. Yeah, that's the other part of it too. Bedouin. We had some time with a Bedouin woman. Settlements are just being summarily dismantled. The Bedouins have nothing to say about it, and they're being dismantled either for putting in roadways, putting in new settlements. And so if you've ever been there, you see all the Bedouin settlements, and those people actually have a role in the land in terms of moving their animals around, especially in the agricultural lands. But they are basically their lands, their small buildings, their livelihood is being totally dismantled.
And the Bedouin society too has a little bit even bigger struggle than your average Palestinian because they were nomadic people. They're trying to prove residency is that much harder and impacts so much of their life there. A Bedouin woman we spoke to expressed how cautious she is to express an opinion about any topic because she never knows who's going to be reporting her or change what she says to cause her to be in trouble with the Israeli government. And here she was, this was a younger woman. It was a woman in the picture who was at the bookstore. And she feels silenced all the time. And this is, obviously today, young people, everything is done on social media. And she is very, very, very nervous, very careful, very cautious about posting anything, anywhere, because of, you know, a little bit of what she's experienced, but also what she's seen other people like her experience.
And she's in medical school right now. She's in dental school. And, you know, to be in a school, to be working with colleagues, but to measure every single thing you say, because of, or to even be ahead of somebody in your program, or to be better than someone in your program, all those things is very confining for her.
And the trust issue, again, you know, how you say, how you present yourself. You don't know who you're going to trust, who's going to turn on you and somehow turn something against you so that you're in trouble and have consequences.
Many of the Palestinians, and also the Israelis, speak both Arabic and Hebrew. However, from the Palestinian women we heard, especially this one woman who speaks excellent Hebrew, along with her mother tongue Arabic, whenever she speaks Hebrew, whenever she's out with her child, she speaks Hebrew and she speaks without an Arabic accent, and she's very good at it. And then she feels very bad about herself, because she's doing it to protect herself and her child, but she feels like she's really, betraying her people. And so it's a sort of internal dilemma. We heard a lot about internal dilemmas people do, lying and trying to present themselves like the Bedouin woman in school in ways that's not who they are, having denied who they are, having to be silent about who they are, and having to pretend to be somebody else in this instance, sound like a Hebrew, in order to protect herself, but then also feeling incredibly guilty and incredibly betraying to her people, who themselves need to be lifted up and be given a voice. So she was very articulate about this, and it was a very compelling story.
And then we did listen to some Orthodox Jewish women also, and we heard stories such as, you know, clearly they're coming from their lived experience perspective, but one story which clearly is misinformation, or is that the word, you know, when it's false news, but she is convinced that she was talking about the Palestinian Authority or Arabs, or not the Palestinian, yeah, the Palestinian Authority, speaking in English, speaking about wanting peace and wanting to find a solution. Internationally, they speak in English. She goes, but then when they speak in Arabic, they're saying something very, very different. So that was, you know, sad. That was just sobering. And I certainly wasn't gonna. She was speaking from her heart. She was clearly suffering, but I wasn't gonna call her on it. But I don't believe that. I think there's enough people who speak Arabic and English who would see that.
We also heard from Orthodox women that, in this particular one I know well, we've had Shabbat in her home many times with my students. Her son was in the military, he was in Gaza, and Talia talked about how her son said that in every bedroom that he went into in Gaza, the children had posters of Hamas everywhere. Again, what we heard was this sort of hyperbolic, they spoke in hyperbole. Everything was everybody when it talked about Palestinians. Everybody is for Hamas, which we know is not true. Fatah is a strong party there. But everybody in Gaza is for Hamas. We know that's not true, too, because many of the Palestinians in Gaza were killed in becoming informants of where Hamas was. We also know that, you know, the notion, what she said is that in her mind, the Oslo Accords can no longer exist. And she said her generation, and I'm probably going on to one of the other things we're going to talk about, but her generation basically got it wrong. They believe the Oslo Accords, but her son's generation is going to get it right. And I said to her, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, what I mean by that, without being specific, is there's only room for one people here. and it was very clear. And this is someone I have known, and we've eaten at her home, and I respect, but her vision was, and again, I go back to the sense of loss. She talked about her neighbor who is, and I remember years ago her talking about it when she had her third or fourth baby and we were there. Her neighbor who's Muslim and their car wasn't working, got out of bed and took them to the hospital, and she was going on about what good relations they had with their neighbors. This was years ago. So I said to her, I said, I remember that story. What's your relationship now with your neighbor? She says, well, I can't trust him anymore. I don't trust him anymore. I can't trust any Palestinian anymore. So that's the shift that has taken place in people's experience. And I guess that's what I just talked about. Checkpoints.
So the checkpoints, we heard the checkpoints change all day, and that makes it very difficult for Palestinians to get to school or to work or for medical treatments. We kind of touched on that earlier, but
Our driver had an app on his phone for checkpoints because he said we were going to head to the Bethlehem checkpoint, but they changed it, so they switched us over. We went over to the Jericho checkpoint, and then they changed it again, and they switched us back to just to go through checkpoints. They switch them all day, so it's very difficult to people to come over to work who have work passes, and certainly hard to get home, and certainly hard to pick up your children if they go to school in East Jerusalem. Yeah.
So for a long time, the city of Jericho ran a few casinos that were populated primarily by the Israeli, because gambling's illegal in Israel, but it wasn't in Palestine. Now when we entered, well, we saw these signs when we entered Jericho. They're from the Israeli government claiming danger, and that any Israeli entering into Jericho will be arrested and imprisoned. And what this did, in effect, was it sort of pulled the rug out of Jericho's. Those casinos brought in a lot of money, and the Israelis coming in would, go out to the restaurant to eat and frequent whatever, like what you would do when you go to another city. So, of course, the Israeli government has, their justifications saying it's for security and protect, but at the end of the day, you can't help but think they're also destroying Jericho. They're taking this population and removing their.
Yeah, Mohammed told us that the monies were used for the infrastructure of the city. So it wasn't somebody making money who ran the casinos. The money was used for the infrastructure of Jericho. And so truly, just in the few years since I've been there, and I was saying this to the group, the infrastructure of Bethany is, dilapidated, but to see the infrastructure of Jericho hanging by a thread was very difficult, because that was a fairly lively and animated city, and people, they can't even market their produce, and Jericho is known for its produce. They can't market that in Israel anymore. Even some of the women that we visited in Jericho, we went to a women's group that does food production. They used to be able to sell their food in Israel, and they made these spectacular desserts and dinners. They can't sell them anymore. So there's no commerce exchange back and forth, either from casinos or from the produce at Jericho. So Jericho looks like a different town right now, and it's very difficult to see how much has been lost.
Excuse me, when you say Bethany, is that Bethlehem?
No, Bethany is just on the far side of the Mount of Olives. Bethlehem is a little bit southwest of Jerusalem, about 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. Yeah. So I think that's it.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Yeah,
no, we have some more. Okay. Oh.
So the trees. I remember growing up hearing about plant a tree in Israel, and it sounded lovely. But it's had unforeseen consequences, or maybe they were foreseen. They planted pines, and we heard that the reasoning behind choosing pines, which is not indigenous to the region, is because they were familiar to the European Jews who immigrated after World War II, right? However, they're huge fire hazards, and we heard of fires throughout different areas, and what most of these fires impacted Palestinian areas because many of these trees were planted to, when there was a deserted Palestinian village because of the Nakba, they would, if they weren't going to use it, they would demolish it and plant trees over it so you couldn't see any of this. So it was sobering to hear all these stories that I never heard before, and I had a very different concept of planting a tree in Israel.
It was also a way of land claiming for Israel, the government planting the trees and getting international people to buy a tree for Israel. It's a way the government controlled that, and then where they planted the trees, they claimed the land. And a lot of times they were claiming land that were just outside of Palestinian villages, and then of course the trees grew and they got bigger and bigger, and so pretty soon they encroach upon the land that is actually part of the village. Again, another land grabbing policy. One Palestinian who spoke to us, a Palestinian woman, was returning home from Palestine after divorcing her husband. Monique referred to her before, but she was accompanied by her 2 children, both under 6 years old. She was strip searched and held for 12 hours by a male official at the gate before she was finally allowed to pass through customs. And because her children now do not have Israeli citizenship, which she has, her 18-year-old daughter was now, basically, she had to leave Israel and go live somewhere else. And her second daughter, who will be 18 next year, also will be denied to live in Israel. Now, she came back after the divorce because her father had left her this house, which she, as Monique said, she had to go through a whole ream of paperwork and money to establish her ownership of that house, and met lots of resistance. Never imagined that because her children weren't born in Israel, they would be denied citizenship. But now her 2 daughters cannot live there with her. So she's facing the choice of whether to stay in the house that was her family home, or she'll have to go live wherever her daughters end up living. Not a great choice for anybody.
We heard from another Palestinian woman in her 60s who had spent much of her life working for restorative justice for Palestinians. She started young. She was imprisoned at the age of 16 and was sent into solitary confinement she was violently treated within the prison and had her nose broken there. She has continued to work for Justice for Palestinians. She spoke to us in Arabic, but there was Zugbi, who maybe many of you know since you're involved with that. He translated for us, and I was touched by, I don't know what the right word is. She just had to keep talking and talking and talking and talking. There were so many stories that he shared. It was like she had all of this inside of her that she had to get out. And she too was, bring our stories back, bring our stories back. People don't know this. They don't understand what we're living through.
And at that same gathering that was at the Restorative Justice Center, it's in Bethlehem, just on the other side of the wall, right near the refugee camp. A mother and a sister were there of the young man that we spoke about before, who showed us a video of the protests in Bethlehem when he was shot in the head by the IDF and he was killed. And then a teacher who traveled to she was a teacher who traveled to East Jerusalem to work in the schools in East Jerusalem. And she was impacted by the crossing checkpoints every day. Sometimes they wouldn't let her through for some unknown reason. Other times they confiscated her teaching materials. She's a grammar school teacher. But that was her experience of checkpoints.
And then right next to, this Center for Restorative Justice, Palestinian Restorative Justice, ironically sits at the foot of the separation wall, this 30-foot concrete wall with barbed wire and, military Israelis and watchtowers with machine guns. And just adjacent on the other side is Zaida refugee camp, which is kind of a jungle of concrete boxes. Clearly, it used to be tents 80 years ago, right, 1948. So we heard stories about living within these refugee camps. This is one of the smallest refugee camps in the West Bank. There's much larger, so I think there's 5,000 residents within the Aida refugee camp. But they can get punished for almost any reason, like children just throwing rocks at the soldiers or calling them names, because of course the children, you know, they're growing up in this, and they're children though, and the IDF will randomly shoot holes in the water towers. So another thing that Mohammed had told us was, how can you tell whether a house is Palestinian or Israeli? And he said it's where the water tank is. If it's Israeli, it's underground. If it's Palestinian, it's up on the roof. And what the Israeli soldiers will do to punish someone for whatever small act they might have done is they'll shoot holes in the water tank on their roof, and the water will come out.
We also heard there's a real, what we might even call ecological nakba going on there. There's a constant, we saw at least 6 diversions of streams and rivers and waters and springs away from the Palestinian village. Go across the bridge, and where the water is going to the village, it would be almost dry. Where the water is going, been diverted over to the settlement, it's flowing and rushing. And this is an Israeli project right now, and it's, I think they talked up in the north where we were, there were 5 springs, very abundant springs, and only one of them is actually being used to service the Palestinian villages up there, of which there are many. The rest are being diverted to settlements in Samaria region. Just a little bit more here. Okay.
So the settlements, so Judea and Samaria, that's the West Bank, right? And we were told that a lot of American Jews are being paid by the Israeli government to emigrate to the West Bank, and they're building these settlements. It's a form of settlement colonialism. You know, when you take over the land, kind of, hate to say it, but what, you know, our country did with the Indians. You kill them all and then go in and build your own house, your own, you know, so.
They're really self-contained villages is what they are. They have schools, they have medical clinics, they have stores, and they sometimes hire the Palestinians living around to do the yard work and the clean out the garbage and that kind of thing. But they're really completely self-sufficient, you know, little villages, but they're all enclosed, all fenced. Yeah. Palestinians are also unable, and you've heard this on the news, but we heard it individually from people, unable to harvest their vineyards. They go out and their settlers have guns and they're shooting at them. And also the boundaries of their properties are being changed. Fences are being knocked down, and they're being told that their property does not begin where the property line says it does. Mohammed talked to us about that, and many of his neighbors have gone through that. So in a sense, your property, you know, any designation you have of your property is not yours, as you heard.
So the educational bookstore that we saw earlier, and we talked about too, the Bedouin woman and the Palestinian woman who's the wife, has a very interesting story over this last year. First of all, I want to explain that it's not just a bookstore. It is sort of like the cultural intellectual hub for Palestinian society, for Palestinian academics. So it's a meeting place that's very precious and very important to East Jerusalem, probably all the Palestinians, but it's located in East Jerusalem. And about a year ago, and Jenna, I remember reading about this because it so reminded me of censorship and what we've seen a little bit in our country and other countries. The military raided it unexpectedly, and they detained, I don't know if they really imprisoned a long time, they detained him for a few days. Mufti, the uncle, yeah, the owner, who is the uncle of the young man now running the shop and the husband of the wife that we got to know. But they took hundreds and hundreds of books and destroyed them, saying they were books that were inciting sedition and violence. So that story became very real for me when I'm sitting in this bookstore remembering having read that article and also listening to his wife, who talked about the fear, not knowing if her husband hadn't been taken, but her uncle-in-law had, and just not knowing for several days what was going to happen.
We heard so many stories of people being in prison. We were visiting, of course, as we're walking through the streets, everybody wants you to come into their shops. So we were being good citizens and we'd go in shops. And I remember in this jeweler's shop, and he was showing us his jewelry, and we said, well, we weren't going to be buying anything. But we ended up sitting down and talking to him. And I remember him telling us that, we said, tell us what it's like, what's life like right now? And he tells us a story of a friend of their family who finally got out of prison, and his daughter went online and wrote a congratulations note to him. They came to his house, grabbed his daughter, and put her in prison for having said that online. And then he had to pay, it took him months to get her out of prison, had to get a lawyer, had to pay a huge sum of money to get his 22-year-old daughter out of prison, who had just made a congratulatory note to a family member that had been held in prison. I mean, that's how absurd the kind of regulations that are supposedly being carried out right now. Palestinians are increasingly accommodating, we think, to trauma, and periodically, as we heard from some of the women, taking a step back and just realizing it's not normal. But we heard so many people that had gone through so much trauma that sounded like they were getting comfortable with it. It was almost like a way of life, and then periodically would realize this is not normal. And trying to balance those two realizations, those two ideations about their lives, that trauma is okay, but trauma isn't okay.
One young woman told us about how it's when people like us come and she learns from us that she realizes that her life is not normal. And that the idea of putting one of her toddlers in a stroller and strolling to the park, completely foreign to her. She can't even imagine doing something like that.
And I guess the last thing, and Monique was alluding to this before, but I think what we realized as we recognized the trauma that we kept hearing, it was opening kind of a floodgates of story. At first, we had to sort of establish that we were trustworthy, that we're really there for them. And there was hesitation at times. But once people started to tell their stories, women started to tell their stories, some of the women couldn't even stop. It was like it was all stored up in them, and they couldn't stop. I remember the woman that at the Restorative Justice Center, Zagbi, just kept very calmly translating for her, but she went on for an hour. And her stories were horrific. But you just imagine somebody walking around with 20 years of stories like that and finally got a hearing. And then all she could say to us is, please tell people what is going on here. And so that's what we're doing. And I don't know what impact it'll have. I'm very concerned with what we've heard in the paper, as Victoria suggested yesterday, the Israeli government claiming sovereignty de facto over the West Bank. They will take control. There's no longer an ABC zone, and that they will start confiscating land and building as they have been building. But in a sense, they're telling the world, and I just want to say, does anybody care? Does any country have the guts to care? And of course, when they're facing Israel, they're facing the US, and that is probably a lot of what the resistance is about. But it's a very difficult situation. It's a silent extinction, a silent extermination that's going on there. It's a genocide, and it's a quiet genocide in the West Bank, but it is going on as lively as it's going on in Gaza.
And one thing we didn't mention, we mentioned that it is an apartheid state, by all definitions of apartheid. But one of the women so we were staying at Ecce Homo, which is a convent where Jenna has taught scripture study, and she arrived the same day we did. This young woman, South African black woman, who is 33 years old, had taken on the job of managing all the programming for Ecce Homo. And we talked to her. She's much too young to remember apartheid in South Africa, but obviously knows a lot, obviously her family. went on to say that the country is not perfect by any means, but it certainly is not what it was as it was under apartheid. And I remember asking her, so how was the Afrikaner government convinced to change? And she was like, sanctions, which is difficult to hear, because how are we going to, the US is not only not sanctioning Israeli government, they're actually supporting them financially. So it's a much harder, and look how long it took for apartheid in South Africa to dissolve.
The other one observation I would make, and some of you perhaps have visited this place if you've been there, it's called Neve Shalom B'Salam. Neve Shalom B'Salam is it started in the 1950s. It's a group of Palestinians and Israelis who live together. By choice, yes. And they've been living together there for a very long time. They have a school called Oasis of Peace, where all the children learn Hebrew and Arabic. All the teachers are either Jewish or Arab or Palestinian. They have a common worship center up on the hill. It's a big glass dome for the three religions, if people practice their religion there. They have a museum, an art museum. I always take my students there. I've been there many times. This visit was disheartening. We talked to the mayor. We talked to several of the women. And what was disheartening is, number one, many of the Jews have pulled their children out of the Oasis of Peace school. It's almost all Arab children now. They do not have a waiting list of people to get in, which they have always had a waiting list of families waiting to live there. Which again speaks of the incredible lack of trust that it's like a virus there right now. Even at this place, there are people at odds with each other, the mayor told us, because some people will not condemn Hamas. And so just within this settlement, which I think was such a beacon of light and hope, and I hate to end on that kind of a note, but I remember Judy, who led us around, lives in a kibbutz that's very much allied with Neve Shalom. It's right next door. She said, my children have left Israel-Palestine because they don't see any possibility of coexistence, and that's what we've taught them all their lives. And that was the concern of many of the people that live there now, of where their children will choose to live. So, if there's anything we can do, I think we need to do it. And we have a few things here, what we can do. I think we need to clearly name genocide and settler colonization and apartheid.
We need to advocate for accountability and adherence to international law.
And reject and expose theologies, religious traditions that justify oppression, such as Christian Zionism.
We need to practice costly solidarity through public active engagement.
And we need to support creative nonviolent resistance, including the BDS, which is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Our government doesn't, of course, support it, but we can support it, and just being sure we don't in any way support Israel. And then finally...
And we need to write our Congress people, and often, and let them, we heard, actually it was not true there, but we did hear that some of our California congressmen are unfortunately not helping at all, not at all. Yeah, so. Yeah.
So I guess we have time for your response or question and answers. I know you have to be out of here at 5:30, and I have to go to school at 5:30 for teaching. But go ahead.
So thank you very much. Apropos of what can you do, while we have a Q&A, we are going to pass around this, what's the term? Petition. I will only vote for candidates who pledge to oppose sending my tax money, to Israel. That's a pledge. So if you are interested in signing that, we're gonna pass it around. Now, to the Q&A, and I can imagine, please keep your comments, if it's a comment, succinct, because we've got to get Dr. Hens-Piazza off to a 3-hour class, and questions. Yes, yes. Do we have someone who can take along a microphone for people?
If you can hear me?
No.
No, all right.
Just a quick question. What you mentioned parochial schools. What are these? Who runs them?
Parochial schools are Catholic schools. There are some Christian schools that aren't Catholic as well, but I think what's distinctive about them, different from our parochial schools or Catholic schools, is they really are a home for children because sometimes parents can't get there because of checkpoints. And they also get food there. And that's very important right now because of difficulties with food being able to be, commerce back and forth across the wall. So they do more than educate. So we call them Catholic schools, but there are also other Christian schools that are there as well. Yeah. Sorry, I should have clarified that.
Yeah.
Bruce, here.
Hi, at the Ida camp, did you see people from Al Rawad by any chance?
No, I didn't this time, but have you been there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So tell me about that.
I volunteered there for 2 months, working with the women
Oh,
and
great.
children in the after-school program.
Oh, that's great.
And they're a big deal there, so.
Yes. Did you, had you have any time with Zugby and the Palestinian Research or Restorative Justice Center? It's right there at the camp. They use the playground and the
No.
grounds. Okay, all right.
I was there in 2018, so the playground hadn't been built yet.
Oh, okay.
Well, the one at the bottom.
Yeah, that one is the older one, yeah.
Who else?
What are possibilities of hope at this point? Is it simply putting enough pressure on our government to stop supporting the Israeli government? And I know you can't manufacture hope, and it sounds awfully difficult.
The one place we experienced hope, and it was wonderful. We met with some women from the Interfaith Center, and they were fairly young women, I'd say in their 30s, late 30s. A Palestinian woman and an Orthodox Jewish woman. And they are part of a long-standing center. It's been there for over 40 years. And they run what's called encounter groups. And encounter groups they bring together people who are at least willing to meet with each other. Not that necessarily have positive regard for each other, but are willing to meet with each other. And in these encounter groups, no politics is discussed. For example, maybe at the first meeting, the 4 people in an encounter group will tell about their favorite person in the family and why. So it might be a grandmother for one, a mother for another. And then they say, now we want everyone to tell your favorite recipe that your family loves, okay? And then everyone shares that. So it's really getting to know people as people. And what the effect is, and some of these encounter groups have been meeting for over 20 years and have grown larger and larger with more and more Palestinians and Israelis in them. And I think these are the Israelis who are speaking out against what's going on by the government. And of course Palestinians who are speaking out carefully, because Palestinians endanger themselves if they speak out. But Israelis are speaking out for them. But when then something happens, for example, when you hear, maybe a Palestinian does something, you don't generalize, well, all Palestinians are like that. Or you hear an Israeli does something, you don't generalize all that. And the two of them were just so affectionate to each other all the while they were interacting with us and telling us about their program. And Avir she kept having trouble finding an English word, and Caroline was like, oh, come on, you know the word. And then we had an Arab speaker with us, and she would jump in, and it was so clearly an affectionate relationship, and really a sign of what goes on at this program. So that was a glimmer of hope. I will say that Neve Salam is still a glimmer of hope. I really think so, because people are staying, they have staying power there. But it's about the next generation, we don't know what's going to happen. So those are the two areas that I think there was some hope. But you're right. As long as our government is funding Israel and arming Israel, there's little opportunity. And no government is standing up to what took place yesterday. There's global outcry, but what does outcry do,
I have a question.
Bruce.
What attempts have you made, or do you think you will make, to speak to groups of Jewish women, such as Hadassah, since your goal is to get the word out and share the stories of these women you've met?
Great. Well, I will tell you, we went to Hadassah. We went to Hadassah Medical Center, and I asked the woman there, who's a Zionist, to speak to us. And I told her why we're there. Of course, she was careful in sidestepping, of course, some things. But she wanted to emphasize how Zionist women, have been very responsible in building networks for healthcare for Palestinians and Israelis. But you're right. I have no problem speaking with Jewish women or the Hadassah organization. I can start with saying that I'm very much concerned about any kind of anti-Semitism. It is true, Jews are being targeted. But alongside that, I'm also very concerned with genocide going on in their neighborhoods and in their backyards to their Palestinian neighbors, who I also care about. And I think that's a way to begin.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi. We're talking about women today. What about the general population of Israel? What is the status? Are they rebelling against Netanyahu? Is there any uprising at all?
I'll take this with my poli-sci background. We did not see anything like that, but I do have Israeli friends who are very, very against Netanyahu. I compare him to Trump, and obviously there are a lot of people in this country who think Trump's doing a great job, and then there are those who are very upset with what's happening with our country. So I see it as very similar.
We really weren't there to really look so much at Israel, but we do see signs of it, people that are concerned.
And actually, that was actually my question, because you talked to Orthodox Jewish women, and I wondered whether the more secular Israelis women whether there were maybe more diversity inside the Jewish Israeli community than you might have been able to identify.
We should have identified the women at Neve Shalom. They were not Orthodox Jews. One was an American from Chicago who had emigrated, the one in the kibbutz 40 or 50 years ago. She's the one who raised her sons, who now live in Geneva and Amsterdam and have told we're not coming back to Israel. And then we met another woman who also, obviously everyone in this intentional community is going to be of a certain mindset. But her family was originally, they were Iranian Jews, and they immigrated in 1948 when supposedly there was this new promised land for all the Jews, and they left Iran and came over. And she's married to I think it was a Russian, someone who immigrated, well, not him, but their families. So, and they were clearly, they did not have the same fear as the Orthodox Jewish women we spoke with. But there was still, everything's changed since October 7th. Everything's changed, 2023.
So was it the same, was it trust, was it the same analysis that they shared?
Trust is broken, yes, trust is broken. And just a little tidbit, the one we met, Ruthie, the Iranian, originally Iranian Jewish, her daughter is the Palestinian comic, Noam, have you heard her? So that was fun to learn.
She's got the movie out now, Coexistence My Ass is what it's called. And she's very funny, but right now she's pregnant, so she's at home at Never Shalom. Yes.
I was going to say there have been anti-Netanyahu demonstrations in Israel.
Yes, I
don't know lately, but my question really was if and when Netanyahu does go, do you think another government will be less harsh?
I don't feel like I can predict the Israelis right now. The cabinet is, of one mind right now, which is unusual. Usually the two parties are at odds with each other, but the cabinet seems they've been able to stack the shelf, and they're all of one mind. And the vote was unanimous about, superiority of Israel over the West Bank. So I don't know. And Netanyahu is going to do everything he can to stay in power. This is not my analysis. This is analysis that's been done again and again, because if he doesn't stay in power, he'll end up in jail. And so, the Palestinians are paying the price of him staying in power by satisfying especially the Orthodox Jews with what he's doing with the Palestinians. Yeah.
What was it like for you as Americans to go through Israeli customs and the checkpoints?
This is a very good question, because I had prepared all the women with what to say. I have been pulled over many times, and I've had my computer checked and my phone checked and sat in a room for a half hour at various times because I was part of the Palestinian American Research Program, so they know who I am. They are so eager to have people visit Israel that I didn't even have to go up to booth to get my thing stamped. They just, now you take a picture of yourself as you're going in. Everything's AI conducted. And AI didn't pick up that I'm part of the Palestinian American Research Program, so that just is how facile AI is. That I went to go up, and the guy said, "Oh, you only have to go up. Did you get your picture?" I said, "Yeah, here it is." And he said, "Oh, well, you can just go through." So we didn't have any problem at all. Coming out, they questioned where we were, but again, I always say, why do they care? I mean, we're going back to our own country. But in any case, no, it was so simple after I had sort of put the fear in everybody about what they were to say, and we practiced, etc. So it was quite opposite, but it's because they want people coming to Israel, which is where they thought we were going. Tourism is down everywhere, but probably in Israel when we were on the light rail going over. We went to Hadassah. That was the only time we were in the West Jerusalem, because we wanted to go to the Zionists. Anyway, that's the only time we went over into the Israel side. But I would say there are a lot more people over there when we were on the light rail. But if you've ever been to Israel, Palestine, and gone through, say, Old City, there's nobody there. You can just go in and out of anywhere. You don't wait for anything. There were no crowds at all. It's quite unusual. Yeah.
Just bringing this closer to home, like here in Rossmore, I don't know what the pulse is, and maybe someone here does know the pulse in our Israeli Jewish community here. We do have an organization, a club. We have also a group called Rossmore Advocates for Diversity, and with a big emphasis on, all living together well as we can. I'm just wondering what you would advise for speaking with people who, in our very own community here, who feel very strongly about the U.S. supporting Israel, excuse me, the plight of Israelis. It's challenging. I find it challenging because you don't want to be offensive, and yet you want to call people's attention to what's going on. And
well, I do think to start with a clear statement that you are against any kind of anti-Semitism, and that indeed anti-Semitism is on the rise, and it's horrific. It's in our country. Jews are suffering all over the world because of it. And I think to start with that kind of a commitment, and then say, but I'm also against what is going on in the backyards of Israelis today. Because the truth is, probably a lot of Palestinians have Israeli blood in them, and probably a lot of Israelis have Palestinian blood in them, if you start tracking it back several generations. It just is the way it is, if you look at the history. I wouldn't say that, but I think to make a clear statement about your commitment to, standing against the plight of Jews and anti-Semitic overtures that are going on, but at the same time, you also are concerned about the Palestinians and the genocide that is going on there, and that as a people committed to, the integrity of humanity, what can we say about ourselves if we stand by and let this happen to the Jews or let this happen to the Palestinians? We have forever had to regret and confess our utter lack of action for the Holocaust. Can we dare afford to allow that to happen again to another people, no matter who they are? I think we have to put it in those kinds of broader terms. If people still can't listen to that, then they can't listen. And we did meet people who can't listen to that. So,
one thing about that, to get people to listen, we have to be careful what words we use. There was going to be a gathering put on by Braver Angels here between some Zionists and some Palestinian advocates. I was going to be one of the Palestinian advocates. And one of the reasons we couldn't pull it off was that they objected to the use of the word genocide, and it could not be used in the conversation. Well, how can you talk about this without using that word? So if you want to be heard, be careful about what words you use and how you say it, so they'll be able to listen.
Behind you.
This is about words too. What if you add to your what we can do? Call Israel, Palestine, like you've been doing. Because I remember we tried to do that about 27 years ago, when they were talking about the wall. And Rabbi Michael Lerner wrote 2 books. One was Healing Israel, Palestine. So I started to call Israel, Palestine, like you're doing. And it was really terrible. People wanted to fight with me for that. But I think it's really important. And you're doing it.
and there's a basis for doing it. In 1948, the UN divided that land into Israel and Palestine. And there has been no change from the UN about that, and no change of the world's recognition. So I think, there is a Palestinian capital in Ramallah. There is a president, Abbas. We give money to support the Palestinians every year. I don't know if we're giving it anymore, to support that country. So I don't know why we would call it just Israel. We call it Israel-Palestine because that's what it was established as. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to make a comment. It's too hard for me to stand up. The word apartheid, I think, is a very good word. And I have friends living in South Africa, and many of them are involved in bringing out the fact that Jerusalem or Israel is having the same problems with apartheid as theirs. They are identifying themselves with them. So perhaps we can get to genocide, but maybe the first word could be apartheid and then move from there.
I think that's a very good suggestion, but also I think they could be very influential and very helpful in naming what's going on from the standpoint of their own experience. I really hope we hear more from South Africa on this. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's really important to include Jewish anti-Zionists when you are trying to talk to other Jews. So here in the Bay Area, the Jewish Voice for Peace is really active. It's really when I have family who are Israeli and live and are very Zionist, and our family are Holocaust survivors, and so I really try to talk to people on that level, that we are doing exactly what was done to us, and how can we live with that. I mean, I think one of the things when you were talking about the Orthodox women that you spoke to, I know when I talk to some of my relatives, they are watching different news. They're living in a different world than I am, and so, you know, what they think is true is based on, you know, kind of like in this country, the way we are so polarized, and people are watching different news. So I don't know how you undo that, because, but I think it's helpful to say, but this is what I see, and I think it's amazing for you to, you know, you are an eyewitness to what's going on there, and you can really tell that. But I would urge you to include people who can also speak as Jews against this, so it doesn't, I think it's a little less threatening.
That's a very good suggestion, thank you.
We're about out of time. We have another question?
One more question?
I speak loudly, I don't need a microphone.
Okay.
On behalf of everybody here, I'd like to acknowledge with gratitude your honest work and presentation, even though it is depressing. Thank you very much. Keep going.
Again, thank you very much, Monique and Jenna. Thank you very much for sharing